Hello, everyone. I'm Keith DeStone, and I'm your host for HeroesX Office Hours. I'm here again with Greg and Sarah and Janet and Elen, as usual. This is for V12, I can't say the last Office Hours, but only the latest in our installment of conversations, we hope.
Well said.
Thank you. So we'll jump right into hours 23 and 24 with the 23 question. Here we go. Is there any way to imagine that Plato was actually present when Socrates died? If he really was there, why would he want to cover his tracks, as it were? What do folks have to say about this one?
Well, someone is suggesting that he's not appearing because what is important is not his person, but the word of Socrates.
Beautiful, beautiful. I really think that's it. And you know, you really can't tell whether he was present. It's just that when the question is asked, was he there? The answer is, well, he was very weak. But what does that mean? Does that mean that, like a student who deliberately pretends to be sick, and what's the American expression, sicks out? Is he sicking out? Or is he sicking out only from the creation of the Phaedo? So I love the way that participant handled this tricky question.
Can we make a connection to filmmaking? A director is behind the cameras and you don't see him, but he is directing everything.
I love it. I think that's such a beautiful analogy. And I know this is going to be a very silly and outdated analogy, but there used to be a television program in the middle of the 20th century called Ozzie and Harriet, and they had two children, David and Ricky, and the idea was that they were the typical American family, and that meant that Harriet was, you know how things were in the middle of the 20th century, simply the housewife. And then David was the college boy, Ricky was the high school boy. And then Ozzie, well, what was he? He kept staying at home all the time. and that's because he was the writer, the producer, the director of the show. So how can he be himself except occasionally stumble into the kitchen and say, "Oh, Harriet, that's great cooking you're doing," or he would just always bumble around, and you'd say he's not doing anything, but he was kind of doing everything. That's a silly analogy because who is going to remember Ozzie and Harriet?
I bet some folks will. Yeah.
Well, yes. Anyway. But the analogy by Janet is perfect. It's absolutely, it's as if, let's do it this way, forget about Ozzie and Harriet. It's as if, and let's do it maybe in a different order. It's as if Plato were the producer, the screenwriter, and the director of the Phaedo.
Mm-hmm.
Then he really shouldn't be out there in front of the camera.
I was wondering about the notion of a word we've talked a little bit about already, which is the theoria. That I think you say in the book, The Ancient Greek Hero in 24 Hours, that it's not appropriate for someone to be a theoros on their own behalf, but perhaps a delegation. And we've got sort of a delegation here if they are witnessing and reporting back on the death of Socrates and the very last words of Socrates, those powerful words.
Yeah.
So can we say that that's a sort of theoria?
Oh, I think we can. Another way to think of it is, while the official Athenian theoria is going on, where the ship of state sails to the sacred island of Delos, then sails back, and you have to be careful not to pollute this trajectory of back and forth. While that is happening, Socrates is in jail, and he is having dialogues with his wife and with his followers, different kinds of dialogues. We don't know the kind of dialogues he would have had with his wife. And so, in a sense, that theoria is an internalized theoria by somebody who never really leaves Athens, except for those few times when he is a citizen soldier and defending Athens in war, but he doesn't travel at all. His traveling is all voyage of the soul, journey of a soul.
And the word is also related to that,
Yes.
witnessing and taking something on board and bringing back. And it is, am I right in thinking that the word is actually related to the word that gives us the word theatre? And so that's in its own way some sort of theoria, the people who participated in the performance, the people who were witnessing that performance.
Absolutely, absolutely. The one thing I want to add to whatever it was that I wrote down in Ancient Greek Hero in 24 Hours is that after that book was published, I got to rethinking the question of whether Socrates had a hero cult and whether Plato himself had a hero cult. And I've come under the influence of a beautiful article by Stephen White, who's a professor at University of Texas in Austin, who reminds us that really there was a hero cult of Socrates, and there was a hero cult of Plato in the context of Plato's Academy, which is becoming more and more and more important in my life as I think about Plato and Socrates, in the sense that all questions about what Plato intended, which are genuine works of Plato and which are simply imitations of Plato, they all have to be looked at in the context of the academy founded by Plato. And in the context of that academy, it's pretty clear that on the occasion of Socrates' birthday, which was also his death day, a very nice opportunity for symbolism concerning life after death, rebirth after death. On the occasion of Socrates' birthday, there were readings within the academy, in the context of the academy, shall we say, celebrating the coming back to life of the word. And as I understand it, the most likely reading that would have happened to celebrate Socrates' death day, which is also his birthday, or may we say rebirth day, is to read the Phaedo, which is, as far as I can see, an exoteric text, not an esoteric text, by which I mean that it's suitable for reading by people who are not already certified philosophers, people like you and me. And most of the evidence for celebrating Socrates' death day / birthday comes from later sources, sources like the Neoplatonist Marinos, who composes a biography of his predecessor, Proclus, where, to cite this one example, there are overt references to the hero cult of Socrates.
So immortality of the soul and logos, the connection there. Now we are reenacting his logos and remembering and continuing.
Yes.
Can
yes.
we say that?
I think so. I think so. And so it's a different kind of hero cult because the body is de-emphasized and not so much the soul, psyche, but the word is emphasized, even radiantly highlighted.
And it is through words that we hear about all of those earlier heroes as well, through myth, through histories, and later histories as well,
Yes.
thinking about Pausanias and Philostratus.
Maybe it would be useful if our wonderful editor gives a link for a write-up that I presented beyond the book Ancient Greek Hero in 24 Hours concerning the hero cult of Socrates and the hero cult of Plato himself.
We'll add those links.
Greg, you've often talked about how it's painful for ancient Greeks to think about Achilles at, to the slightest degree, given that he died and
Yes.
the whole story of the Iliad.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if we can view Plato's remark, his word choice, in that way, that it was too painful for him to put himself in this scene with Socrates, his teacher.
I love
where
that.
he died.
I think that's a beautiful insight. Yes.
Yeah, at one point, there's a mention of logos bringing healing that also cause suffering, then healing.
Yes, yes, yes. You have to sort of live through it all and live through the pain all over again. Yes.
Well, shall we go on to hour 24? That question is, why is it important for the citizens of Athens to think of the hero Theseus as a savior?
Yeah, well, one participant comments that the condition of savior in the myth is what guarantees that the Athenians will be saved generation by generation
Beautiful.
through the repetition of the myth.
Yes. 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 And the beautiful thing about Theseus is that he is the culture hero of Athenian democracy. It's not just the city of Athens, it's the city of Athens as it became, as it turned out to be, starting from the late 6th century and working forward with some horrific episodes where the democracy was overthrown temporarily. But basically, it's a sustainable democracy, and the sustenance of this democracy is highlighted by a culture hero, Theseus, whose very name means founder. He's our founder. And it's very clear to us, looking backward, that such a figure can be the #1 hero of Athens only in the context of a democracy. So he is definitely, shall we say, a constantly changing, but in other ways very stable representative of democracy. And after all, Athens did, in a fairly stable way, maintain its democracy after its foundation in the late 6th century, before our era. I would also add that all of this doesn't mean that Theseus is perfect in his behavior. Look at what he does in the Hippolytus of Euripides. It's not a Euripidean invention. It's part of the mythological heritage that Theseus makes horrible mistakes. But we're used to that. We're used to this idea that heroes, even if they're larger than life, are capable of bad mistakes. In fact, precisely because they are larger than life, their mistakes sometimes even dwarf the kinds of mistakes that little people like you and me make in our own everyday lives.
So now, how logos would become a savior?
Yes. Well, it would be transformational, to go from Theseus as the savior to Logos as the savior. Just as it's transformational, transformative, that the theoria of the Athenian state, which celebrates the original salvation of the Athenian state by Theseus, the fact that that sacred voyage of the ship of state is replaced, even in our own minds and hearts, by the word theory as we have inherited it through the Platonic revolution, where Plato essentially transforms what had been a salvation myth for the city of Athens into a kind of personal salvation myth for how we humans can face our mortality by way of contemplating the universe, a theoria that is pioneered by Socrates while he's in jail during the period of the official theoria of the Athenian state. So it is revolutionary, or maybe revolutionary isn't the word. It's radical. It's a transformation. I sometimes say hijacking, but that sounds like something morally questionable. If I say, well, Plato and his whole model of thinking has hijacked the old meaning of theoria and therefore the old status of Theseus, that doesn't sound good, does it? So that's why I'm trying to think of other ways of saying it. He transforms it. And that's why for us, theory is simply, however we understand theory and theoretical, and it's not something that has to do with the sacred voyage of an Athenian ship of state.
Greg, I was looking a little bit at some of the other passages that you
Yes.
give in Hour 24 and other examples of
Yes.
savior type passages and savior myths,
Yes.
from Odyssey,
Yes.
and from other places. So if we've been thinking in terms of Theseus as savior of Athens, and part of that myth that then gets integrated into new ways of thinking. Can we look at other examples and apply the same sort of things going on in other places? Is there evidence for that?
As usual, dear Sarah, we just don't have enough information from other places. Greek civilization becomes so Athenocentric, especially in the 5th century, but there are traces of it even earlier. The fact that Athens, the state of Athens, for all intents and purposes, owns a Homeric transition is always Exhibit A. That basically the kind of Homer that we're left with is, shall we say, an Athenian Homer. So there are very few cases where you can really isolate a heroic model outside of Athens. Let me give one example that is rather old, and which is not all that well attested. And here it is. It's the city-state of Megara, which used to be a mighty city-state, but because of the vicissitudes of history, it got stuck between two eventually more powerful city-states, Athens to the east and Corinth to the west. In Megara, it's very clear that the hero called Ino, I-N-O, when she dives into the watery depths below and drowns, and then comes up for air, so to speak, as the white goddess, it's pretty clear that the version of the white goddess myth as attested in that city, is a perfect example of salvation myth, because it's anchored to the idea of the corpse of the hero. As Pausanias, that great traveler of the 2nd century of our era, reports, only at the city of Megara is there a myth that says that the corpse of Ino was washed ashore in the region of Megara. Everywhere else, she just pops up from the depths of the sea offshore as the white goddess. But in Megara, you have the more complex situation where somehow the corpse of the female hero who was drowned gets resurrected in the context of a hero cult that is specifically tied to the locale of Megara. So anyway, that's one example of a local variation on a theme, not directly comparable to the Theseus myth, but when it comes to the salvation of a community, it really works. Another example would be, it's not so much local, because we're talking now about a city that had pretensions of being better than Athens, and I'm thinking of the city of Alexandria, founded by Alexander the Great, where the regime that continued after Alexander, this is the dynasty of the Ptolemies, maintained the library of Alexandria as not only the tomb of Alexander as their #1 cult hero, but maintained the library which encased the tomb, the Library of Alexandria, as a, how shall I say it, a symbolic manifestation of the word coming back to life. Every time you read a scroll in the Library of Alexandria, the words come alive, and because the body of Alexander is actually located within the library, and let's not get into all the Egyptian modifications of the Alexander myth, but let's do remember that the mummy of Alexander is a symbol for the eventual resurrection of Alexander. But if you have a hero that is destined to be resurrected as the center of a place where words are resurrected every time you read a book, and by book I mean a scroll of papyrus, well, that's a redemption myth, a resurrection myth that comes very close to the Platonic ideal that we have read in Plato's Phaedo.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
I love the fact that at the new Bibliothèque Nationale, which is near the Place d'Italie in Paris, the architecture symbolizes the coming back to life of the word when you read a book. And it's done by way of ivy, the motif of ivy that pervades the building of the new Bibliothèque Nationale, the new National Library. It's as if the evergreen nature of ivy is a symbol for the everlasting power of the word. So how's that for a modern variation on a theme?
We saw Ivy in the ship of Dionysus and the Homeric hymn to Dionysus that we were reading as well.
Oh my goodness. Yes, you're so right. The ship of Dionysus is such a beautiful symbol of how you can be saved if you maintain equilibrium. And of course, only the steersman of that ship is saved. And then he tells the story to everybody, and that's how we know the story. Or at least that's the way I read the Homeric hymn to Dionysus. Absolutely true.
Mm-hmm.
one other thing is, think about Plato's theory of forms. It's more Plato's than Socrates's, but let's say the Platonic Socratic theory of forms. The best place to get familiar with it is Plato's Phaedo, which, as I remarked in an earlier context, an exoteric text. It's something that should be understandable even by us amateurs in philosophy, people who just love the wisdom of philosophy, can I put it that way? And so when you think of it, the theory of forms, it really comes down to the word eidos, or better, idea, I-D-E-A. That's what English-speaking philosophers are thinking about when they translate that word, idea, into form with a capital F. When you think of idea, the ideal, if I can just go back to a very reductionist way of thinking about it, it's that what's real is the ideal, the world of forms. And then what we have in our everyday lives is a copy of that. And then if you try to paint that, well, that's a copy of a copy. And in an inclusive numbering system where you don't have zero, that's 3 steps removed, 3rd step removed from the ideal. Well, the whole point of the voyage of the ship of state is that it started with Theseus, our founder, who goes to Delos and comes back in his Theoria. That's the first trip. That's the archetypal trip. That's the ideal journey. But then we, Athenians, we reenact that year after year after year. And as we can see from the reception of Plato's Phaedo, there was a lot of philosophical speculation about whether there's any part of the original ship of Theseus, or may I say the ideal ship, that has survived in the ship of state, which is notionally that same ship, but every time there's something that gets corroded, well, then you replace it with a spare part. Let me put it this way. Is the ship of state in 399 BCE full of spare parts where there's no single aspect, not a single atom of that ship that goes back to the original? Well, it all depends, again, on the power of Theoria and whether we think of it as something that is not tied to this year or the previous year or next year, but a kind of resurrection-oriented eternity, a recycling forever, a forever that is circular, not linear. So in that sense, wouldn't you say that that even the theory of forms and the fact that the ship of state that makes its journey is full of spare parts, a way to think about how renewal must happen through the word? Otherwise, we're just dealing with an assembly of spare parts.
So all these spare parts are in harmony, though.
Yes.
It fits. It fits. Every reenactment, it fits.
A perfect fit. But the perfection can only happen with repetition, with recycling. And the recycling has to go on forever. And that's the heroic ideal itself. It all fits in my mind. It's such a beautiful fit.
Well, friends, should we wrap it up for this occasion of reenacting the Heroes course from 0 to 24?
That's right. That's right. From
Ah.
0 through 24 and back to 0.
So we'll be back to 0 coming very
Starting
soon.
in a few weeks.
I can
Yes.
hardly wait. I can hardly wait. So may the recycling continue.
Yes. Thank you, Greg, for everything you've shared this
Thank-
semester. And
thank
thanks
you.
to you participants for all of your
Thank you.
questions.
It was just beautiful.
comments.
And thank you, team of 4. You're simply amazing.
Thank you. Okay, well, until the next time.
Inspiration. Yes.
Okay, we'll be back.